All right, you're on the drive-through with Raj here in Ashland, Virginia. We're sitting in the green room of the Ashland Coffee and Tea, right on the tracks here in the crossroads of town. And I'm sitting right next to banjo virtuoso Noam Pikelny here on the drive-through. Thank you very much for being here. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
thanks for having me on.
You are very gracious. You've had a long drive today, and we'll hope to make this a nice, relaxing interview for you.
So far, it feels great.
Yeah. Well, it's just you. This is a great tour.
It's just me here tonight. Yeah, it's a brand new endeavor. On my part, I've spent most of my career playing on stage with fairly large ensembles, at least 4 or 5 piece bands, and all of a sudden on this run, I've stripped it down just to myself, and I'm playing a whole lot of banjo and singing and playing some guitar and some other instruments, and I'm having fun with the new format. It really gives me kind of ultimate freedom, and I can take all the credit if the show goes well, and I can take all the blame if it goes poorly.
That's right. As you said, it was a funny thing on your blog saying that you're doing this thing that none of your fellow musicians seem to want to have anything to do with.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I've guaranteed the audience they're getting something that none of my associates would want to be even part of. So.
Do you travel with you travel with your own sound man, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, Soundman doesn't really give a full description of the man who helps me out with all this stuff. Dave Cinco is the patron saint of Punch Brothers. He's been with Punch Brothers since the beginning, so for over 10 years. He's a world-class studio engineer, and he's been with us for every single Punch Brothers show, with maybe an exception of 3 out of thousands. And he's one of the most amazing engineers and people I've ever met. And so, embarking on a solo tour like this was daunting enough as it is, and having him helping out, trusting that the sound will be right is a huge weight off my shoulders, because I feel like in a solo show, the subtleties are crucial. That's one of the main reasons to do a solo show, is because you're giving people an audio glimpse of these instruments in this high resolution that they've probably never heard before in a live setting, maybe on a record or something like that. But the banjo has a lot of detail to it, and I think people associate the banjo with it being a very kind of rambunctious, loud, piercing, repetitive instrument, which it can be to great effect, but it also can be mellow, and it can have sustain if it has the kind of sonic real estate for that stuff to shine through. And so when I was planning this tour, I thought, well, the sound of my instrument is actually more crucial than ever, because it's the only thing up there. And
I wanted to very exposed.
Bring Dave and make sure it was just right. So.
And I'm always getting on my sound box about appreciating the sound engineer and having someone up there who can mix acoustic instruments, because there's guys who can do rock bands really well, but you give them a bunch of acoustic instruments and it's a whole new bag.
It's an absolute art. Dave's famous line is, when people say, "Oh, it sounded great tonight," he'll say, "Well, I just turned it up." And I think his philosophy is really just trying to take the way instruments sound naturally and make it louder, as opposed to trying to shape the instruments into something that they're not. Some soundmen feel like it's their duty to make the instruments sound like other instruments, or to make up for their deficiencies at the mixing board, and that's always kind of a fool's errand often. And so I love his approach, and he's been great with us.
Another thing, when you're talking about the complexity of sound you can get out of a banjo, is a great segue into one of the things I definitely wanted to ask you about. Is there's plenty of banjo jokes out there, but when we see you and we hear your interviews and things like that, you're not joking about the banjo. You have a really cool, very intelligent left of center sense of humor, but we don't joke about the banjo quite so much, because you've made a banjo, you've helped to make the banjo a very respectable instrument, and there are so many other great players out there along with you that have made this a great tune.
Well, I see where you're getting with that. The banjo, I think initially, before Earl Scruggs came along, the banjo was largely a prop. It was a comedic prop, as part of the kind of the country western shows of that time period. And if you look at photos from some of those bands, even playing on the Grand Ole Opry. Like the banjo player would have his pants only pulled up to his knees, like the famous banjo player String Bean, who was actually a great musician, went on stage, and the banjo was kind of a prop for him, and they were often the jokesters in the band, the jesters in the band, and the banjo, after Earl Scruggs put his hands on the instrument, and the subsequent pioneers like Bill Keith and Bela Fleck, Tony Trischka, everyone who's come along and just continued to turn this thing into a real art form. I think that there's no doubt, I think in people's minds who listen to music, that real music can be played on the instrument. But I still like to have a sense of humor about the instrument because of its checkered past, and I think it's well and good to be able to take the instrument seriously on a musical level, while also joking kind of about its history in in popular culture. And so one of my favorite vignettes along those lines is there's a great banjo player named Alan Mundy, one of the greatest banjo players who's ever lived. He's still out there playing, one of my heroes. I'm not sure what the context was, but someone asked him what it's like being one of the greatest banjo players in the world. And he says, well, can you imagine what it would be like to be one of the greatest kazoo players in the world? That was the greatest response.
Exactly. With the tunes that you do a nice a mixture of tunes that you've written and old time songs, especially with your last album, the
Kenny Baker project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kenny Baker plays.
It's a mouthful. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, but it's awesome, and you won the IBMA award
Album
with that.
of the Year, yeah.
That's great. So, is there a balancing act for doing covers versus doing your own things, or is it just you like to mix them together?
I think it's in the course of the show, the solo show, it is a balancing act. What's the plural of impetus? Impetuses? Impeti.
I'll look it up.
How about this? One of the reasons to do this show was that I've been working on a bunch of new original music on the banjo, and I wanted to kind of test some of the stuff out, and I had this goal of writing music that would stand alone, that wouldn't require a band for it to kind of be fully fleshed out. And so I'm bringing a bunch of new songs, new tunes to the stage tonight, but I also want to round out the set with classic material. And I think one of the trickiest things has been that a lot of the stuff I've recorded, all of my records up until this point have featured full bands, and a lot of those songs, the magic lies within the interplay between the various musicians on those projects. And so if you take that away, how do you present those songs? And so I'm focusing, as far as the classic bluegrass stuff from the Kenny Baker record, this record, Noam Pikelny plays Kenny Baker, plays Bill Monroe, which is it is a reimagination of this Kenny Baker fiddle record from 1976. And for those things, I'm treating a lot of those songs like an Irish musician would treat various Irish tunes. I'm playing them fairly strict to the melodies, and not having to necessarily improvise all the time. And I feel like these songs, when the melodies are played authentically, they stand up just like that. They bear repetition, and they can just be played as sets or medleys. And so there's some of that, and I'm taking a similar approach with some of the original songs I've recorded in the past. So it's a mix for me. I guess it's the duality between my love of traditional music and my interest in finding new sounds in the banjo that kind of have that's been the guiding force. That there's always been those two things for me, and I think everything that I work on the banjo that's new, even if on first listen it has no direct connection to Earl Scruggs. If you can't, maybe you'd hear it and you wouldn't trace the lineage to Earl Scruggs. I feel like the fundamentals of Earl Scruggs are the fundamentals of good musicianship, and I try to employ those things in any endeavor musically, regardless of whether it falls within the classic progressive bluegrass realm or something completely outside of that box. So I love some of my most favorite music are things that sound completely new, but I know exactly kind of how they got there. I can hear the influences and see the path, and I feel like that's what kind of it's almost like, well, that's verified there. It's been vetted because they did their homework.
Right. Yeah. Um, your your original stuff is really complex, and other bands that you've played it, are the music's challenging just to listen to, let alone play.
Mm-hmm.
Do you write a lot of stuff down, or is it just kind of like what I come up with and then here listen?
It varies. I use the voice memo recorder in my iPhone a lot
All the
for
time.
making musical notes and brainstorming ideas, and a lot of times when writing stuff on the banjo, I'm trying to coax sounds out of the instrument that aren't necessarily banjoistic, maybe not idiomatic to the instrument, and sometimes those take a lot of it takes a lot of heavy lifting technically to like pull those things off. Even if it doesn't sound that difficult, it may not sound complex, but it might require a difficult technique that until I've practiced it for months, it's something that I'm focusing on actually pulling it off. And so when I'm working on music like that, writing music like that, I often find that I have a hard time listening to it while I'm actually playing it.
Right.
And it's hard to really listen with the ear of like an editor or of a writer when I'm sitting there just trying to be the person executing it. And so the availability of voice memo recorders on phones, that you don't have to carry a separate voice recorder anymore or a separate tape recorder. I do more of that than any actual scoring in either notation or in tablature for the banjo. And so there's a lot of audio notes, and every now and then if there's a part that someone has written, if Chris Thiele has arranged a certain section for a Punch Brothers song, and it's going to be played the same way every time, and it's a complex fingering, I might put it into my computer and I'd go in there and adjust the fingerings to get it to something that's kind of memorizable. But for the most part, it's just kind of learning things orally and making oral notes.
Yeah. Well, because I was checking out some videos, especially the ones with you and Stuart Duncan, and there was a music stand there with some little pieces of paper on there, but I don't know if that was just some notes or whether it was
that he just had a mirror on that stand so you can make sure his hair was looking good for him. He's the consummate professional, Stuart Duncan. Now he had some arrangement notes. Stuart's hilarious in this regard. Like, we played that show many times. I know he could have played the show without the notes on there or some lyrics. He had some lyrics on stage, and but he liked having it there just in case he's based on it. That was a new endeavor for us. Like, he never kind of goes out as the lead singer in a band, and that duo was kind of the most sparse performance setting that either of us had been involved with up until that point. Now it's even more sparse for me, but he as the lead singer of that band, of that duo, he wanted to have the lyrics there just in case. So
he sounded great.
Oh, he's a hell of a singer.
And you're going to be singing tonight too.
I will be.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, because everyone has seen the Funny or Die video.
I know.
So, all right,
that is a serious conundrum. How do I go on stage and sing earnestly after that video? People associate me with like the worst singing ever attempted in association with bluegrass music, and so I've made a name for myself as a terrible singer, and now I actually want to be able to sing in earnest.
Well, vocalists, real vocalists, I fancy myself a vocalist. We know you have to be really good to be able to sound that bad. You really,
That's right.
You have to be good. You have to know what you're doing. It's like the shred videos, the Highway 40 Blues.
Oh yeah, the people who make those shred videos,
they gotta be.
They
awesome.
have to be really good to be
Yes.
able to get that stuff to line up. I'm glad that's the first time someone has ever said that singing was so bad that he's actually a master. You can't fake that kind of amateurism.
Well, last question before I let you go and get ready and all that stuff. You may or may not know that I'm kind of interested in the game tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I just want to know if you have a pick and if you have a favorite game. I don't want to influence you or anything.
Well, it's tough. I feel like I owe it to the Broncos, just because I spent a couple years out in Colorado. I was living in Colorado playing with a band called Leftover Salmon.
Oh, yeah.
And so I have some loyalty to the state of Colorado. But in the 1930s, Gibson, the instrument company, shipped more of their classic 5-string Holy Grail banjos to the Carolinas than to any other part of the country.
Wow.
And Earl Scruggs is from North Carolina. So much bluegrass tradition down in that part of the country. And
I'd be amazed down there now.
And more of those old Holy Grail Stradivariuses of bluegrass instruments are under beds and in closets in the Carolina region than anywhere else in the country. So I'd hate to go on record saying that I'm rooting for the Broncos and have someone hear this podcast who was planning on calling me tomorrow to say, "Hey, Noam Pikelny, we have this old banjo under our bed. We were going to give it to you because we wanted to go to a nice banjo player. But you're rooting for the Broncos,
now.
so we're going to burn it." So I'm not gonna. I'm rooting for a good game.
Me too. Thank you. All right. Well, Noam Pikelny, thank you so much for being on the drive-through with Raj, and awesome. You're playing tonight. I don't even have to plug the gig because it's sold out. It's sold out show tonight. Ashland Coffee and Tea, and I can't wait to see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Making my show better than it would have been otherwise.
I appreciate it.
You're listening to the drive-through with Raj.